parenting is really about falling in love with about 25 different versions of your kid because they just grow and change. But the cool thing is, and probably my favorite thing about parenting, is that they are still inside exactly who they were. Their little personalities from when they were young. They're still those same people. They're just in a big grown-up version of that.
I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Today's guest is going to be able to provide us with a little bit more of a long view on parenting than perhaps some of the other guests we've had, many of whom still have young children or maybe kids in their teens, because Kristina's eldest is now almost 24 years old. So she's been a mom for quite some time. And she just has such a great perspective to be able to share on the different seasons of parenthood, how she made this kids or child-free decision. You will hear that she never wanted to be a mom before making the decision to become one. So let me just tell you a little bit about her, and then we will get into today's conversation. Kristina Chilian is a licensed teacher and time management coach for college students. As a high school English teacher, she witnessed many of her former students struggle as they tried to transition to college. After her own son struggled with anxiety and overwhelm as freshmen, she felt called to start a business helping students thrive in college by teaching them how to organize their schedule, manage their workload, and reduce stress. Kristina lives outside of Richmond, Virginia with her husband, 2 sons, 3 cats, and a dog. Kristina, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. As you and I were just chatting about when the two of us first met a couple of weeks ago, you were telling me a bit about this new coaching business of yours, which I hope to hear a bit about today. But once we got onto this topic, which inevitably somehow all of my conversations end up focusing on this kids or child-free question, you started talking about your motherhood journey. And I was interested to hear more from you for a couple of reasons. One of which is I think you can give us a longer view and perspective on the experience of having and raising kids than perhaps some of our other guests, because as you'll share with us in a second, I know your kids are older and you've been at this for a while. And you also just shared a couple of perspectives and views, about how you'd make your decision and maybe how reflections around that look a bit different as you've aged. So certainly we've got lots of good insights, wisdom, and perspectives coming your way, listeners. And Kristina, what can you tell us about yourself? Why don't you just share a little bit about yourself?
All right. Well, thanks so much for letting me join you today. I'm excited to talk to you about this. I am 54, so I might be a little bit older than some of your guests. And yes, I do have 2 older kids. My oldest son is 23 and my youngest son is 21 and still in college. I am currently a high school librarian, but as you mentioned, I am starting a coaching business. I'm hoping to actually connect with college students, specifically high school students transitioning to college, and helping them with that journey, helping them transition. So I was an English teacher for 5 years. I was a stay-at-home mom for 11 years. I have 2 master's degrees, which one I got before I had kids and one I got while I had kids. So hopefully I can, add some perspective for your audience here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have no doubt. And I always find it's incredible. I think a lot of us overlook all the different sort of lives we've lived, if you will, and the different experiences we've had or jobs or what have you. And just having you share what I'm going to guess is just scratching the surface of who you are in your life and the experiences you've had. It sounds like you've done and experienced a lot, academically, professionally, certainly as a parent. So I look forward to delving into all of it with you.
Yay.
Now, I'm interested. I always love by asking my guests to sort of start back at the beginning. And I'm curious, did you plan or want to have kids someday? Is that something that you always knew?
So it's funny. I was definitely I'm not having kids person.
Okay.
When I was growing up, and I'm Gen X, so we were I feel like we were the height of parents are getting divorced. The baby boomers are learning that, some stuff just doesn't work. Their generation, their parents were, the greatest generation. And so there was a lot of traditions that they carried on and then learned pretty quickly that they just weren't working in the 70s and the 80s. And so I watched my parents get divorced, my mom be a single mom for 2 daughters, for my sister and I. And to me, she was just a mom. She did not work. She stayed at home. We lived with my grandparents. And I'll admit, I was a little bit embarrassed by that. I had this view that, there was something maybe even less than about her just staying home. And I was a little bit embarrassed and ashamed. And so I looked at that and said, that's not going to be me. I threw myself into school. I love to learn. I love to read. And I was just very interested in everything that I could do to get out of the house and to create my own career. It was the 80s, so there was a lot of, working girl, and we lived outside of New York City. So my dream was be a bank investor on Wall Street. We had a lot of movies and cultural stuff in the 80s about women, working, wearing their running shoes as they walk down the streets of Manhattan and their business suits. So that's the picture I had in my head. That was kind of the dream I had. And kids did not fit into that dream at all. My best friend in high school, she had the names of her kids picked out already. And I was like, no, I'm good. She babysat. I never babysat. I didn't really want anything to do with kids. My younger sister was 9 years younger than me, and I didn't even have to babysit her. So I loved her, of course, but I just was not big into kids. And it was something even in my 20s that I just was not interested in.
Okay. So, and it sounds like then, of course, looking at things with more adult eyes, we might say, well, did you envision or think maybe there was a middle ground where perhaps you weren't that stay-at-home mom and there was an in-between? But what I'm hearing from you is your experience growing up, what you saw just totally put you off of, would you say that's the reason why you didn't want to have kids based on what you saw? Or was it just because none of it appealed? You wanted something different for yourself. How do you understand that now?
Yeah, I think part of it is knowing my core personality now, which I did not understand back then. And I always felt a little bit more like a guy inside and was not ever very girly. I wasn't a tomboy or a jock or anything like that. But I felt like I had the personality of a guy.
Yeah.
And in fact, my husband references that frequently. But I think part of that was, I did not see myself in the role of staying at home. I felt it was demeaning in some ways. I felt I was more of a feminist and I would just work and I knew because my mom did a good job raising me, even as a single mom. And I understood the value of staying at home with kids because I looked around and I saw my friends whose parents worked and how they struggled. And I came home and there was someone at home to give me a snack and my friends could come over. We would play. My mom was always home and we could play in the backyard and stuff. And so I saw the benefit to the kids of having a stay-at-home mom. And so I knew that, if I was ever going to consider it, I definitely wanted to stay at home. And that just didn't seem like me. So I didn't want to shortchange children by what I perceived as shortchanging them. And back then it was very hard to work and have kids. It's, it's definitely a lot. We've come a long way and we can support our working moms better now.
Yeah. Still, I think seeking improvements for the most part, especially in places like the States where you live. I know even in Germany, where I would say there's quite a bit more support there. No, there definitely is a lot more support for moms and parents. We still have a long way to go. But yeah, what I'm hearing from you is like you didn't see or sense any sort of nuance around what might be available, how else it could look. It was just like, I think this is the best way. It's what I've experienced. I would want to do things that way myself. And that's not what I want to do. Therefore, I won't have kids. Okay, so how did you go from that to having 2 kids?
Yeah. So the 180 there is part of it is I matured out of the childish view of what motherhood was, and I started to understand how much more complicated it was to be a mom and a stay-at-home mom, and how much work it was, and how it was actually more elevated than I thought, and that you could be intelligent, which I prized intelligence, and you could be intelligent and be a mom simultaneously. And so that viewpoint began to change. And alongside that, I met my husband, my, now husband. Mm-hmm. And we had the kind of relationship where I just felt very safe and I felt very at home with him. He was my comfortable place, and he was such a great guy. When I met him, the funny thing is, I met him at the Jersey Shore before the show. Of course, this was the mid 90s, but you can find actual love at the Jersey Shore. I'm
So it
happy to say,
seems.
yeah. And so we were both in shares on a beach house, and so we got to spend time together at the beach. And what I learned about him that first summer is, he was really very smart and extremely funny. And he had an MBA, which for me was a sign of further intelligence and a desire to be educated, which, that's one of my values. And so I was very attracted to that. And then on top of that, he was just I was able to just relax around him. He was so loving and caring and supportive. And like I said, just a really safe space. And so I began to imagine a life that I hadn't been able to see before. I began to imagine a life where I created my own family with this man. And together we were able to create something that I hadn't necessarily lived through myself. And it was an ideal, of course, that we all saw. Mom, dad, and kids, and maybe a suburban house, a cul-de-sac, which I was able to
I was
do
going to ask, do you
twice.
live in a cul-de-sac? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Very good.
I had house goals because when I was growing up, we lived on a main road, and so I did not want my kids to grow up on a main road because it's really hard. You have to be very careful with them, and it's very stressful. And I wanted my kids to have like a cul-de-sac to play in, which we did meet that goal. So I'm excited. But at the age of, and he's 5.5 years older than me. So when I met him, I was 24, he was 30. And I immediately was thrown into this world where there's 30-year-olds. And so now it's like the mid to late 90s, and all his friends were married, and they were starting to have kids. And my friends weren't even married yet. So I got to see sort of a little bit down the road. I got to see 5 years ahead right in front of me and experience it and see, well, what does it look like when a woman who works in Manhattan decides to have a kid and, has a kid, and what is she able to do with that? And so it was really eye-opening for me and made me see that it was a possibility. And what made me actually want it for myself, I think, was just a confluence of all of these things, right? Like right at the same time, seeing it happen successfully, wanting to create that family life because I got a taste of what it felt like to be safe and loved. And of course, my family always loved me. It's not that I was unsafe at home. It was just very chaotic. There was a lot of crises all the time. And so it was nice to have a very drama-free connection with someone else and build that life with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And were there still fears or hesitations, or was it like when this shift happened, there was just such a sense of safety and desire to create this sort of ideal family with your now husband? Was that quite seamless, or was there still, is this really what I want?
I think it was pretty seamless. I am a reader. I am a book lover. And so I, of course, tackle every problem by reading a book. And so I began watching shows. This was back in the beginning of TLC, the Learning Channel, and they used to have like the baby show. I forget what it was called. And so I was watching those shows, and I started reading books and preparing myself mentally, because I am like a logical person and I don't lead with my emotions. I lead with my brain and my thinking and my overanalyzing. So that's how I was going to approach this. And so I knew that if I could wrap my brain around it, the rest of me would be okay with it. So I sort of went through that process. I watched other people do it. I talked to them about it. People who I looked up to, women who I looked up to, and who I found to be very intelligent, and we talked about it, and they opened up and were very authentic about it, very vulnerable. And so by listening to their experiences, by doing my own research and reading, it was pretty seamless.
Yeah.
Anything that I did worry about, like I was obsessed with not throwing up as a kid. So as a kid, I thought, well, I'm not going to have kids because then I'm going to have morning sickness and throw up. Stuff like that. I matured out of. Other worries like my body, I was always very thin. I was known for being very thin. And so there was some worry about, well, will I get my body back? And so I just watched other people do it successfully. And I thought, well, okay, well, if I know it can be done, then I can do it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious. So how old were you when you had your first?
So I got pregnant when I was 29 and I was 30 when I had him.
Okay. And tell me about those early days of motherhood. I'm interested how and if at all your impressions of this experience changed. What was surprising? What was wonderful? What was challenging?
Yeah. So I had everything all planned out. I had read all the books. I found a midwife. I found a birthing center. I was going to do it very naturally. I'm not like anti-medication or anything, but I like to try things naturally if I can. And so that was the plan I was going to do. It ended up being like a 63-hour labor, and
oh my gosh.
I ended up having to transfer to the hospital, and I hemorrhaged. And Max just took his sweet time coming out. So the impact on my body physically was more than I could have imagined. And the way your body feels after you have a kid, it's like you're in an alien body.
Yeah,
and
I can't imagine.
You have 9 months to prepare because you get bigger slowly, and that's fine. Like everyone knows that that's going to happen. You're going to put on weight. You're not going to look the same. Your breasts are going to get large and sore and all the things. But you don't really know what that feels like. There's a difference between knowing it and feeling it and experiencing it. And so that is a little bit, it's like an out-of-body experience, really, because you're in this alien body and you think, how am I ever going to feel like myself again? Like and I think this is part of the postpartum, experience for women that can lead to issues like postpartum depression, because your body is so different. And on top of that, you have the hormones just coming at you. And so it really leads to a sense of like, I don't know who I am. And simultaneously, now you're a mom and you have to take care of this completely helpless thing, this baby. And so I was surprised by that. I was also surprised a little bit that like when Max came out, I was just so exhausted and so glad that it was over. I was like, oh, good, that's done. And I wasn't like, oh my God, there's my baby. Like, this is the first time I've seen him. Of course, I loved him and he was very cute and unique looking, but I didn't have any sort of overwhelming feelings. And that sort of surprised me a little bit because I knew that other people did have those feelings. But at the same point, I knew that I wasn't like a super emotional person. And so it wasn't overly surprising. But they're like, do you want to hold the baby? And I'm like, well, can we clean the baby first, then hold the baby? And I think everyone was like, okay, I guess so. So, that was surprising in the beginning as well.
Okay. And so had you always thought you'd have a second child then, or how did that come about?
So, my first son, he was a late bloomer, and it turned out later we found out that he's actually on the high end of the autism spectrum. But we knew once we had him that we wanted him to have a sibling. I was an only child for 9 years and I hated it. And I wanted a brother or sister the entire time. And so I knew that we were probably going to have two. The experience of the first birth was what it was. But I will say that it's still like a day or two out of your life. It's not, even as bad as it is for whatever you experience, it's still just a couple days out of your life. So like that should not ever put anyone off because, as you get older, you end up going through these medical things all the time. So it's, that didn't put me off. And I knew that the second baby would be easier just because everything had already, the way had been made already. So I wasn't worried about that. And we wanted a sibling for him. So I think we were definitely going to have a second baby.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions and perhaps we can touch on this more when we look at things sort of from that long view over the last 24 years. Is it now that you've been a mom? Did you see your eldest is 22?
Yeah, 20. He's 23. Yeah, he'll be 24 in June.
Yeah. Wow. Has it gone fast, by the way? Does it feel like yes and
Yeah.
no?
Yeah. So my friend introduced me to this saying, the days are long, but the years are short. And that is very true. It goes by, every stage takes forever, but when you look back, it was just like a second.
Yeah. Did you feel, let's say in those early few years, that the ideal version of how you saw this family to be and this experience of motherhood, how you hoped it to be, did it meet that, or did it fall short in certain ways?
Um, I think I was so entrenched that I didn't really step back and compare the two. I
Yeah.
think for the most part, I felt very blessed for what I had because I knew I had two healthy boys. I knew we had a lovely home in a nice neighborhood. They were getting a good education. And I felt so blessed by all of that, I guess in some way we did meet, that sort of family dynamic I was hoping for. My
Yeah.
husband and I almost never fought. And if we did have arguments, they were easily overcome because we both have really good senses of humor. So we would just sort of turn it into something funny at some point, like,
Yeah.
wow, can you believe this is even happening? Um, and it's definitely easier to parent, I would say, if you have a really good sense of humor, because the stuff gets really crazy
Yeah.
pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think I was just so grateful for what we did have. And then once my kids got into school, that was really when things started to open up for me. I think when the kids go to school full time and you have your whole day ahead of you, that's really when life really opens up.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I want to ask, first of all, you mentioned that so I think you said at the very beginning, you stayed home with your kids for 11 years. You had mentioned that that was the vision that you saw for yourself, but you also talked about these examples of women who were working in Manhattan, also raising children. And so how did you do it yourself? And are you glad that you chose that way?
Yeah. So my work experience, like I said, in my mind, I'm this bank investor executive person, right? In reality, when I got to college, I realized that I had a lot of anxiety. And I also realized, I graduated second in my class in high school, and I got to college and I went to Rutgers, and there was a lot of really smart people at Rutgers. We're only second to Princeton in New Jersey. And so I was like, okay, I'm not the smartest person in the room anymore, and I have to work really hard. And so my transition to college was very bumpy, which is another reason why I'm doing this coaching business. But so when I got out of college, my expectations of myself were pretty low, and I started working as a receptionist. I actually interviewed for an airline as a stewardess in Newark Airport. That was fun. Continental, back when that was a thing. And anyway, but I ended up being a receptionist in a pipe hanger company. And pipe hangers hang the pipes off the walls and
I was
stuff
going
for
to ask
plumbing.
what a pipe hanger is. I'm like, I don't know what that is. Okay. They literally hang pipes. Okay.
Yeah. So like most people think of a pipe cleaner, but no, pipe hanger. It's like the little metal thing that a pipe runs through, like on the ceiling or along the wall. And so I was a receptionist for them, obviously very overqualified. I had a bachelor's degree. I had triple majored in English, history, and political science. And I knew I wasn't going to be a receptionist. I moved into sales just because it was a promotion and I was comfortable with the job. But because of my anxiety, I allowed myself to sort of stay very safe. And then I met my husband while I was working there. And I told my husband when I met him, I'm going back to school. I'm going to get a master's degree because I knew that I was meant for more. But when I don't know what to do, I just go back to school or I read a book. So, so I went back and got my master's degree. And I remember I went to Boston College and one of my professors said, "So what are you going to do with this degree?" And I literally had never thought about that. I assumed that I would just be like working on a campaign or something and pictured myself in Washington, D.C. I don't know. And so he's like, "Well, you could teach." And I was like, "Oh, teach. No, there's I can't, not in a million years could I teach. Like that wasn't happening." And which ends up being ironic. So I graduate, and right as I was graduating, it's 1998. The Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton thing was happening, and so I went, "Ew, politics," and sort of took a step back from that because I didn't want to be involved in anything with that grossness happening. So I ended up working for a bookstore and then a publishing company. I worked for the publishing company. I was just in customer service. And I was doing that until I got pregnant. And so here's where I would tell people to kind of pause and take a look at why you're deciding to get pregnant when you get pregnant. Because I got pregnant because, we knew we sort of wanted kids, but I got pregnant at that minute because I did not really know what I wanted to do. And I did not like where I was. And I thought, well, I could just get pregnant and stay home with the kids. And which, when I think back, is like a horrifying reason to get pregnant. But it wasn't like the only reason. Obviously, we knew we wanted kids. I just really wanted to get out of where I was. It was a very stressful job, and I hated it. And the idea of staying home with the baby was just like, it was like angels singing. Like I could just stay home and hang out with a baby. And obviously, being at home with them was important to me because I wanted to teach them the initial stuff. I wanted to be the one that, even though I didn't see myself as a teacher, and even though education was highly important to me and reading, like in my head, I'm like, well, I'm their first teacher. And so I want to make sure that they're getting that stuff from me. And I want them to always know that they have that support at home. So I wanted to be the one that taught them to read. Literacy, even though I didn't really know how to talk about it, literacy is like another huge value of mine. And so the choice I made was to stay at home. The choice I made was to stay at home at that time because, like I said, I just wanted to get out of my job. And then what I ended up doing when the kids were young is, because I need that intellectual stimulation, I ended up doing like work from home stuff. So at first, the pipe hanger job, they gave me a little job doing accounts receivable from home. So once Max was in preschool and Sam was just like watching the Wiggles on TV, I could, do a couple of hours of calling people and asking them for money. And then I ended up doing some MLM stuff. I sold Avon for a while. Did I do the candles? I don't think I did the candles.
Like, you can't keep track of all your various careers.
Like those little things. And of course, those, you don't make money with those. Those are just a way to connect with people and, keep you busy, I guess. And so I did that stuff. And then I remember sitting around the pool one day. And I had been volunteering once the boys went back to school. Or went to school, I was volunteering in their elementary school, specifically in their library. So like when your kids go to school, you get 4,000 papers that come home.
I've heard this.
Every day.
Now it's like check the message portal or something like that.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's better. Anyway, so there'd be this folder and it would be jam-packed with all the stuff they did, plus all the notices and everything. And one thing would come home from the library. And it was this volunteer thing, like you can volunteer in the library. And I was like, oh, I love to read. I really loved that when I worked in a bookstore part-time. I really loved that. I love, working with books. I'm a bookworm. I can go volunteer in the library. That's a great job. And then they'll see me in the library, my kids when they come in. So you could volunteer like when your kids had library time. And I was like, I'll just work the whole morning. I don't care. So I was in there. And their school librarian, Ms. Schneeberger, she is like the best librarian ever. And I was in there and I was like, this is like heaven in here. I'm looking around, you're surrounded by all these books. You have little kids coming in. They're excited to read. They're excited to talk about books. She would read them a story. I would be like in tears, like listening to her read stories to them.
So cool.
And I was like, okay, this is definitely something that I could do. And then but the idea of getting from where I was, which was, being at home doing nothing, to being a school librarian, like that just seemed a hurdle too far.
Being at home raising children, I just want to point out, not nothing. I get your point.
Yes, thank you. So that part, and that part I was okay. At. I will say I was never very good at, it seemed like we were all very into scrapbooking for a while and interior design and that kind of stuff, crafting. I'm just not good at that stuff. Yeah. So being a stay-at-home mom was a struggle for me in those ways, because the other moms in the neighborhood, I felt like I connected with them on some levels and not on a whole lot of levels. So it was a little difficult. But I will say I started a book club in the neighborhood, and that helped. because now I could talk to women at night without the children about books. And so that was kind of my saving grace. But so once I was in the library and really enjoying it, I was like, okay, well, I wonder how I could get to be in here. And so I was sitting at the pool with one of my neighbors, and she's like, oh, I'm just finishing up a program. It's a career switcher program where you go back to school to be a teacher. She's like, I'm going to be an English teacher. And I was like, an English teacher. So I could teach people about books. Like, that sounds really cool. And then I started thinking about my English teachers and how much I loved English. I majored in English in undergraduate school. So I was like, oh, maybe that's something I could do. So I substituted at the high school a few times. And of course, that's nothing like teaching, but at least you get to see the environment. And I was like, okay, I was getting used to being in roomfuls of children after, throwing a few birthday parties and then volunteering in the school. I was like, this is actually something I could do. So, eventually I did the career switcher program too, and ended up teaching English for 5 years. And when I started working full time, my kids were 9 and 11. So I had, Max was 11, which means that I had been at home for 11 years. And they were at a really good age for me to start back because they had been in regular full day school for enough years that they knew the routine. They were also old enough that if one of them was sick, they could stay home kind of without us, maybe. And so there's a couple days that were, maybe we should have been there, but but they survived. And so that was a really good age for me to go back to work. And I had gotten to the point where I was like, if I don't do something, like, I don't know what's like, I'm going to strangle someone. I need to get back to work. So I was really ready by the time I got back. And because I was teaching, I had the same schedule as them. So it was like totally ideal.
So I have a question about working in a school environment, both doing the librarian stuff, the teaching, and having children. So you've got kids at home, you've got kids at work. I've had other people who are on the fence, who are teachers or who work in a school environment or with children, express some concerns about like, how am I going to be able to manage not just other people's kids, but my own? Did you ever find that challenging? Or if not, I guess I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I think if, first of all, I could not have been a teacher if I did not have my own kids, because it taught me how to manage kids. And teaching these days is roughly 80% classroom management, and then 20% you're actually teaching the content. It's a big struggle. So I worked in a very difficult school, and the school I work in now is also has its challenges. So my kids comparatively were easy.
Okay.
I think it really depends on who you're working with. And so I really appreciated my kids. I would come home and go, thank goodness. And you get to see the differences in parenting techniques and what the results are there. You get to see how different people live. And I really was like a parent to a lot of these kids. And so I feel like, if you are a teacher and you're thinking about having kids, it's easier to have your own kid. It's easier to teach your own kids in many ways than it is to teach other people's kids. How to balance a teaching and, a life with small children, I did not have to experience that. So I said, my kids were 9 and 11. I have, obviously I work with many teachers who do that. And the tough part is having to call out when their kids are sick. But, if you work for a good school district, you get like 10 days. And so between you and your husband or you and your partner, you can figure out, who's going to take off today for the kids. And so that's definitely a struggle to think about. But I don't think it's a problem with, if you're worried about teaching too many children at once, like you're already teaching 120 or whatever. Like if you're at the high school level, then 2 more is not really a big deal. And the funny thing is I would come home and, sometimes you could wield that. Like, you come home and they would have a question or start to be annoying. And I'd be like, I already dealt with this and this today. And they were like, oh my God, you can scare them with some of your stories from
cautionary tales. Yeah. I'm at capacity, no more.
Yeah. And then once my kids were in high school themselves, it was even easier for me to connect with my own students who were that age and really empathize with them more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it helps to have kids if you're a teacher.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. All right. I thought I would take a second and tell you about this month's support series sessions that we have going. Now, if you've not already checked out these sessions, a quick rundown on what these are about. We have 2-hour sessions that are happening each and every month. We've got sessions for those of you who are still very much on the fence, trying to figure out whether kids or child-free is the path for you. And we also have sessions for those of you who are pretty sure that child-free is the path for you, who want to become confident in that choice. So what we've got going on the Kids or Child-Free support series session side is a 2-hour session that's happening on May 20th called An Uncertain Future. And I don't know about you, but when I open my social media or I check the news, it can feel and is pretty darn scary out there at times, right? We've got climate change, we've got political upheaval, we've got the rise of AI. There are a lot of different things to be concerned about. And if you are trying to figure out whether or not you want to have kids, it can feel like a pretty scary place to think about bringing a child into. If you are trying to figure out how to navigate this decision, then this is the session for you. I'm going to be offering reflection prompts. I'm going to be doing some teaching. We're going to be thinking through and discussing together how we can make this decision in light of the uncertainty of our world and the future. So that's happening again, May 20th. If you are pretty sure that child-free is the path for you, and the big thing, or one of the big things that's standing in your way, is what's going to happen when you're old? This is what we hear again and again, right? What's going to happen when you're old if you don't have kids? We're going to be talking about just that. We're going to be talking about how life can look as an older person, as an elder without children. We're going to be talking about things both from a more practical standpoint as well as sort of an emotional perspective. Amazing conversation with women who have either made the child-free choice or pretty sure they want to be child-free. We have an incredible community of women who have been taking part in these support series, and we'd love for you to join us for the event that we have happening on May 22nd. So again, 2 different support series, depending where you're at with your decision. I will include the link for both of those in the show notes of today's episode. They are happening on May 20th. That's the Uncertain Future episode for our Kids or Child-Free support series. Pardon me, not episode, but session. I've got podcasting on the brain. And on May 22nd, we have our session, When You're Old. How do we consider this child-free choice in light of getting older? It's inevitable, we hope, right? We hope we're around to get old. That's happening on May 22nd. All right, let us get back into today's conversation. To the extent that you're comfortable discussing it, you said it's your eldest son who's on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, correct?
Yes.
This is something that I hear from a lot of people on the fence that they're very fearful of. What if my child is neuroatypical, I think is how we frame this is, excuse me if I'm not using the proper language, but, what if my child has health issues? There's all these what ifs, these uncertainties. And would I have the capacity to be able to manage this and how terrible this might be, et cetera? I'm curious for you how you were able to navigate that, if you can speak to it at all, or maybe give a view from the other side where people might be worrying about this.
Sure. So my son was born in 2001, and we could tell right away something was a little different about him. He was so sweet, first of all, very smiley, very happy kid, did not like to be held, and would run once he could. He started crawling at like 6 months and walking at 9. So he was very physical very early on. I have a picture of him at 3 weeks holding his head up, which is like crazy. So, we knew he was unique, but we didn't know how unique because he was our first child. Yeah. And you never know. You don't know what you don't know. So he was evaluated, I think, in about a year and a half. And he was he liked to run into walls. And he would throw his hands up and run and smack into the wall or the TV. But we had him evaluated because he wasn't really talking. But that's what they picked up on, was the running thing. And so it turned out that he had a sensory processing disorder. And we were like, okay, we've never heard of that. So of course I got a book on it and read all about that. And what I would say is, as we learn more and more about what was going on with him, ADHD, autism, we took him to a bunch of different people to try to figure it out, is you really just deal with it as it comes up, just like you would with any other issue. And every child is going to have something going on. My youngest son ended up, with some OCD, some anxiety. When he was young, he had some anger issues. So it's like there's always going to be something, whether it's teething or, like something minor like that, or something more major, a health issue, God forbid, there's going to be something. And so you really just problem solve as you go along. And it's important to remember that a lot of stuff happens in phases. But if it's something like this, where it's, more of a chronic long-term thing, it's really easy to get lost in the weeds. And so it's important to take care of yourself while you're taking care of them, and make sure that you are, providing everybody with an equal amount of attention too, like yourself, your partner, your child that has an issue, your child that doesn't have an issue, like whatever it is. You really just, however you approach crises or problem solving in the regular world is how you're going to do it. So, you sort of make a plan and just go after it.
I realize you have the benefit of hindsight, I guess, or like you're probably on the other side of a lot of these struggles. Of course, you're still, and I want to hear about like how it is today, because we talk about, well, it's your responsibility. You're looking after these kids till they're 18. But my mother, she's in her early 70s. My youngest brother, I think, is 36 now. I'm almost 43. And at least from what she tells me and what I see, it really never stops. That said, hearing you talk, I'm like, Kristina's so relaxed. Like and I know I do want to talk about the anxiety piece as well, because that's something I personally identify with. And I think a lot of listeners do. Would you say that you have personality, a temperament that makes you well equipped to be a parent? Is this how you've evolved to be over time? Like, and maybe another part to that question is, what do you think has allowed you to take this all in stride? If you think about sort of the foundations of being a parent. I know that was about 3 questions baked into one, but
yeah, no, it's funny because I remember teaching. One of my not co-teachers, but colleagues came in, and she was just in the back of the room watching me teach for some reason, and she's like, "You're so relaxed and calm when you teach," and I'm thinking, I don't feel that way. Like inside, my heart's like beating a million miles per minute.
I get it.
I think part of it is perspective. Like I learned that when you're in the middle of stuff, it seems really bad at that moment. But you also need to have the larger perspective of, this is going to pass. This too shall pass.
Yep.
And you really can't take everything too seriously, because then you just make yourself and everyone around you super miserable.
Yep.
So in terms of the anxiety, I really wish I had gotten a hold of that earlier on. And I ended up doing an at-home program. It was like a 16-week program. I don't even know if it's still available anymore. Lucinda Bassett was her name. It was like the Midwest Center for Stress and Anxiety at the time. And it was workbooks and CDs. And it was mostly about, loosening up your perfectionism, if you will, and letting go of that and realizing that you can't control everything. And most of parenting is control or a lack of control, or trying to have control over something. And so whereas I started as a type A personality and having control over everything, you quickly learn, childbirth being the very first, pregnancy and childbirth are your first teachers, that you have no control. You can control how you react, and you can control to some extent your environment, but what's actually happening, you have very little control over. And so there's an amount of faith you have to have in yourself and others and in any higher power you believe in. But also you have to be willing to say, you know what, I'm not going to have control over this, and it's still going to be okay. Like, we'll figure it out. And I also had a lot of faith in my own, intelligence and my own ability to problem solve. And so when something comes up, I don't freak out. And part of this might be coping skills I developed as a kid, because there was always something happening and I managed to get through it. And so I'm like, well, if I can get through that, I can get through this. And I also know that I have help, and like calling on your resources is so important. One of the myths I think that we as a society sort of keep alive is that, you have to kind of do it yourself. And so, like, if you're a mom, if you don't have your house clean and your kids aren't clean and all that stuff, that's on you. Like, no, it's literally, you need a village to do any of this stuff. And you need moms that are your age, or have kids your age. You need moms who are ahead of you so they can help you figure out what to do and give you that perspective. And I did have that, which was very helpful. Bill's friends, some of them their kids were a little bit older. And then once we moved into this neighborhood that we're in, which is filled with people who moved from out of state, we all became each other's, village. And so we have kids all over the place. So it was easier to see, like, well, what does the future look like? And, what can you be calm about, or what do you really need to focus on? So using your resources and that village is definitely important.
Yeah. You share so many valuable things there. And I like this idea of having examples around you. And I think this is really important at every stage of being a parent or choosing the child-free path, is that we often go to both worst case scenarios as well as the ways in which we don't want it to live. We don't want it to look or to live. So, oh, I don't want to be a mom like that. I don't want my child-free life to look like that. Okay, well, why don't we focus in on and see if we can cultivate and have those examples of what we do want? And something like you say, especially someone who's maybe that further step along the road, I think is really important. And, it's part of the reason that I want to have conversations with different people at different parts of their journey, especially when we may not have these examples available to us in our life. I also like what you said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but really talking about your own resilience and having trust in yourself that I'm going to get through this. I think a lot of us, we forget, I say our track record's 100%. It doesn't mean we've always done 100% in life, but like we've gotten to today, therefore we've been, quote, successful as far as making it through the muck, whatever it has been. And I think this piece around perfectionism, control, there's a huge amount of uncertainty with this decision, especially when it comes to having kids, but also when it comes to being child-free, especially when we think to those older years and maybe haven't had examples of how a child-free life can look in our 70s, 80s, and beyond. And the thing is, no matter what, you're going to have to contend with uncertainty. You're going to have to contend with, like, what I tell people is whatever your issues are, whatever your triggers are, this decision and the consequent choice you make is going to shine a light on all of that. And what I'm hearing from you is like this parenting decision has allowed you in a way to resolve, or at least work through and live with some of these challenges. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that parenting has allowed me to sort of figure myself out in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do without kids, right? I would have had, and there's a lot of judgment, whether you have kids or don't have kids, and you're not sure if you want kids, there's so much self-judgment. That's such a huge piece. And so letting go of that is important. But, I guess watching myself develop and paying attention to, like, who am I inside? And like, how did that change over time? And it allowed me to, being a parent allowed me to sort of experience that as I was raising my kids, like teaching them how to be themselves, I was learning how to be myself. So, I learned a lot from watching them grow and teaching them and trying to help them stay on a path that was true to them. And then I was like, well, I kind of have to do that for myself too, Tone. I think if I had not had kids, it just would have looked different. Like I'm very much a proponent of, you don't know if you're making the right decision or not. Just make the decision right.
Yeah.
Like go with what you think. If someone told you had to flip a coin, I mean, this is probably going to sound really silly, but if someone told you, you have to flip a coin, and then you watch them flipping the coin, like in your heart, like there's one side that you want it to land on. And so go with that side and then just figure it out. It'll be fine.
Yeah, that is such a good recommendation. And I mean, you say it sort of sounds maybe bizarre or silly, but this I believe this sort of exercise, literally flipping a coin or, kind of turning it over to fate, looking at this sort of impulse that comes up can help us connect with what it is we want without whatever judgment, censorship, what have you, that comes in immediately after we land on that, right? We think like, oh, but, oh, this, oh, that.
Yeah. And I think we take ourselves very seriously, especially in our childbearing years, 20s, 30s, 40s. We take ourselves very seriously. And now that I'm 54, I feel like your 50s is like who cares anymore? I don't care what anyone thinks of me anymore.
Yeah.
I don't have to impress anyone. I'm not trying to be like sexy and skinny and perfect and, well spoken or anything. I just need to be me.
Yeah.
And so age definitely helps with that. But of course, then you've aged out of some of your decisions there. So yeah, not taking yourself so seriously. What I love for you guys these days is the ability to, postpone the decision with the technology that's available. So like being able to freeze your eggs. I think they were just kind of starting to do that when I was coming up. And so being able to say, maybe not right now, but maybe someday, and having that option is amazing. But let the technology, let that stuff take some pressure off of you to, to not have to make that decision right this minute and just go with how you feel right now.
Yeah. Good advice. I'm interested. You've talked about support systems and, some of these fellow moms that you came to know. And from what I'm hearing, there was perhaps in your household with the kids being young, more of, we could say, like a traditional arrangement as far as your husband, it sounds like, was that primary breadwinner. You were at home with the kids. I'm curious about that dynamic between the two of you and maybe how it's evolved over time, because you mentioned that there was this sort of lightness and laughter and joking. How has he figured into this, I guess, equation, if you will, of being a mom in terms of bringing ease or conversely challenge? I hear from a lot of people the partner is a big factor. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely having the decision to have kids rested a lot on him. In terms of like, if I was with someone else, I might not have wanted to have kids.
Yeah.
Not that he, made me have kids or anything.
Yeah.
And so our relationship through the years with kids was the same way our relationship was before kids. And what I'll say is that kids really they add a new dynamic to it, but it's really just, they amplify however you would deal with crises or problems or issues, however your personality is, how you communicate, all of that stuff, all that's going to come out anyway, even if you don't have kids. Kids just make it a lot more visible, a lot louder, a lot quicker. And so, the two of us we like to avoid conflict and we like to joke around a lot. So that got us through, our child rearing years pretty much. And he's a big help he likes to kind of do things in steps and very logical. So when the kids were young, and he liked to have a schedule, and we're both kind of schedule oriented people, which I think benefited our kids quite a bit. And so the type A personality does help a little. So he would, for example, like the nighttime routine, he would go in, he would lay out all these wipes and set up the diaper and set out the pajamas while I was bathing, the kids. And so he was a big help with stuff like that when he was at home. And I think he and I, the only things we ever did end up arguing about would be discipline, because, we have two different sort of viewpoints on that. But they were an amplification or a reflection of how we approach problems to begin with. So, for example, I like to read books and seek out experts and find out what's the latest information that we have on this topic. And he relies on his own knowledge and understanding, and then also looking at like his dad. So when it came time to discipline, he's looking at his own childhood and his own father and how he reacted to things. And I'm reading books on it and, learning on the internet, all of the things that I needed to know. So we clashed a little bit there, and we ended up kind of finding a middle ground for the most part. But for the rest of it, yeah, I mean, we were pretty on point, which was good. But I think a lot of that, like I said, we were so relaxed before and just like enjoying ourselves. And then we just kind of had kids and tried to bring them into that feeling.
Yeah. I'm interested, with your kids now being in their 20s, how, first of all, do you have a favorite season of motherhood, if you will, like that you've enjoyed most, if whether it's now, whether it's when they were younger? And how do you feel about being a mom today, looking back on this journey you've gone on thus far?
Yeah, it's, you know, every stage is so unique and you don't realize because the edges of the stages blur quite a bit. So they move from one to the next and you don't realize you've left a stage until you go, oh, you know, he's sleeping through the night, or, you know, he doesn't come in the middle of the night and wake us up anymore, or like he doesn't, you know, come in and snuggle in our bed anymore, like, or oh, he's done gaming until 3 a.m. You know, it's every stage is definitely unique. I enjoyed them in high school. My kids were very good teens. They did not get into any of the stuff that, you know, my husband and I got into as teens, or, you know, the drinking, drugs, like none of that. They were very responsible. It also, you know, COVID happened, right? My second son was a junior. So his senior year was just stupid. Like it was online.
Yeah.
But he loved it because
Okay.
he would attend class online for 10 minutes and then be gaming the rest of the time and still got straight A's. So that was a crazy year. But I like them as adults. And it makes me sad sometimes when, you know, you look back at pictures and videos of them as kids, because of course you miss them at that age. And parenting is really about falling in love with about 25 different versions of your kid, because they just grow and change. But the cool thing is, and probably my favorite thing about parenting, is that they are still inside exactly who they were. Their little personalities from when they were young, they're still those same people. They're just in a big grown up version of that. And so, like my youngest son, for example, who's at Virginia Tech, he wore a Spider-Man costume for like a year, just around the house all the time when he was about 4. He still has a Spider-Man poster on his wall in college. Like, and that's just a simple example,
Yeah.
but you know, the what makes them who they are is still the same. It's just a different, like, adult, cool version.
Yeah.
So I've really enjoyed watching them grow and become like humans. This age is very challenging because now we're trying to launch into adulthood, and I'm trying to actually learn how to unmother. I'm
Yeah.
trying to draw back and make sure that they're learning from their own mistakes, that their consequences are natural. They've surpassed the point where I can tell them something and then they'll actually like listen to me. They're at the point where like they're just going to try it for themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to watch them make mistakes at this age that affect their whole lives. Right. So my oldest son stopped going to college. And so he has an associate's degree, but that's kind of it. And he's working at Five Guys now, and he's 20, you know, he's going to be 24. And yes, of course, he's on the spectrum, but he could be, you know, in my mind, of course, he could be doing so much more, so many different things. He's so bright and so sweet and so friendly. And I don't, you know, it's hard to watch him not kind of blossom, to get stuck. And so we're working on the launching thing with him. So it's just a different, you know, it's a different, my coworker used to say, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. Um, and I will say that, you know, when they start driving is probably the scariest part, because if you think you have no control over your kids when they're little, wait till they get in a car and drive away. It's frightening.
Yeah.
But now that they're older and more experienced at driving, I feel much better. So I think this is probably my favorite, you know, phase. They're just fun to hang out with, like, as adults. And we were very lucky during COVID lockdown. As a family, we would just like watch different movies every couple of nights, every other day. Like it was someone else's choice to pick a movie, and as a family, so we really got to know each other more. And we were blessed by that, having that time together, because I got to know them more as adults. And so that was really cool. So that was, like a blessing in disguise a little bit.
It sounds like the relationship, I mean, understandably continues to evolve, and your role as parent has changed, that I can imagine it's hard to have that letting go, but at the same time, there's still that support and trying to help them become the adults that I guess that they best are able to be, whoever they are.
Yeah, it's interesting because my sons too are a little bit socially, they're shy. They don't go out as much as, I mean, my husband and I were super social people. We're both introverts, but we hung out with our friends all the time. And our kids aren't doing that as much. And I know that's partially this generation, but also just partially who they are. So I want to encourage them to go out and be more and do more and see more.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of a struggle watching them not really have any interest. I took my oldest son to Niagara Falls, and he was like, "Yeah, that's nice." I was like, "Wait, what? Like, it's Niagara Falls? Isn't that cool?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's fine." All right, they're a little bit underwhelmed by the world, so that's
do you think
interesting
that's
to watch.
technology, or what do you attribute that to?
Maybe. I mean, their specific age is, especially my older son is not really huge on technology. He's not on any social media at all.
Good.
My younger son is, I think, mostly just Snapchat and Discord, which is like the gaming chat room. But they were never big. I will say we did a good job. They were not allowed to have phones till they were 13. And at the time, I think, the technology and the social media available, it wasn't quite as crazy as it is now. I watch the students at my school, they literally cannot be without their phones for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And battling them with their cell phones is the biggest problem we have right now.
Yeah.
And it is scary for sure. So I know for my sons, the gaming was kind of the biggest problem. And so, by the way, I think one of my regrets, probably my main regret as a parent, is we always said we were not going to let them have a TV in their room, but we did not say that about a computer. So I would say that not having a computer in your kid's room is probably the way to go, especially if you have a boy and they like to game. So that is a regret of ours. But the technology does play a role because they do have online friends from their gaming, and that world is so comfortable for them, and they get that dopamine hit when they play and everything. But they're older and aware of it, and we've talked about it. We've read books together, on it. So we're working on it, and I know it'll come because they're both great kids and they're very funny. So it'll come. It'll just take time.
Yeah. As do so many things in life. It sounds like they have wonderful parents to guide them. And I love that from the sounds of things, there's an open discussion and dialogue about, what's going on, these different concerns, and that you've done a good job raising them.
Trying.
Yeah. Again, it doesn't stop. No. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to make sure we touch on?
I do think that one of the things I wanted to say was, probably my other favorite thing about parenting is like watching the seeds that I planted when they were little grow. And so an example of that, because of course reading is important to me and books. So when the kids were little, first of all, when they were in utero, I would read to them like before they were even out. And then I would put the little headphones on my belly too and read to them, all the things. And then we read every night, of course, many stories. And then I was, showing them how to read. And as they got a little bit older, Max loved to read. Sam, who's my youngest son, like not so much. He could read. He did fine in school, but he did not love it. He did, it was just not for him. He had too much other stuff going on. When he was, I think, like 17, I walked by his room and he was reading a book. He had his feet up on his desk. And I was like, I drew up short. I was like, what is happening right now? He's like, oh, I heard about this guy. And it was, I think, David Goggins. He's like, I heard about David Goggins and, he sounded really cool. And I wanted to read his book. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I didn't want to disturb.
Don't move. Don't say anything. Pretend it's not happening.
So I just walked away. And just the other day, I walked by. Max had a book on the coffee table. He's reading Oh Pioneer by Willa Cather. I don't know why. And so I'm like, okay, so this is something that I've planted in them when they were young. And now to watch that grow, even though, Sam did not like to read because he was surrounded by it all the time. And he saw me reading all the time. Bill's not even a big reader, but, he saw me reading all the time and he knows, the importance of it. Like it came to him and I didn't even have to like do anything. So I would just say that, when you have kids and they're young, plant those seeds. And even if you don't see them, what's happening, they're germinating in there and they will
Yeah,
grow.
absolutely. Yeah. And,
Yeah,
replace reading with whatever other values you hold, whatever is important.
exactly.
I look at me and my two brothers, we're all very different from each other, but we have this like really intense love of nature, of being out in the mountains, hiking. We're all super into these like outdoor sort of pursuits. And I chalk that up to the fact that my parents took us outside so much, that they took us to the mountains, that they took us on hikes, they took us skiing. And, of course, as a kid, you've got mixed feelings and it's a slog and you don't really like it. But I do think it planted those seeds, as you say. So, yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes our kids, I'm sure, will end up different than us. But it certainly, I think, is a great way just by modeling that and bringing those things into the relationship with them to set them up. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited that, your listeners, first of all, if your listeners are struggling with this question, the fact that they're struggling with the question tells me that they would be good parents. So if that is a concern, don't even worry about it because you're already acknowledging that, there may be some struggle or there may be some difficulties and you're already thinking about how you would figure that out. So I already know that you have, good problem solving skills and just, tuning out as much of that outside noise as you can and listening to what's inside of you. Um, my wish is that your listeners would find peace with their choice and then just make that choice right and not look back with regrets. I think if I had to do it all over again, if I had gotten a hold of my anxiety at an early age, I might have made a different choice because I think a lot of that, even though it seems counterintuitive, like if you're
It
anxious,
does.
why
Tell
would you
me
have
more.
kids? So I think because, like I said, the anxiety made me want to just stay at home and be a homebody. And the easiest way to do that was going to be to have a baby. And I didn't really overthink, like, well, what happens when the baby's a child and like later stages? I really didn't think about that too much. And I will say one thing that did also influence me to have kids was, which I forgot to mention earlier, was watching my mom take care of my grandmother when my grandmother was older. And so this happened when I was in college
Mm-hmm.
and then when I was in our early marriage. My grandmother had Alzheimer's and my mom brought her up from Florida and took care of her. And I watched that and the logical part of me said, well, who's going to do that for you when you're older if you don't have kids? And so there was that like practical part of me that was like, have kids so you'll have someone to take care of you. But the anxiety really was about me not wanting to go out in the world and, do the hard stuff, like be the person I knew I could be, get around the anxiety and learn how to kind of cope out in the real workplace, take on more responsibility, take on harder jobs, like do what I needed to do, like be the person that I was before I hit, I guess, puberty. I was like, really like focused and outgoing and I knew what I wanted. And then with all the hormones came all the anxiety. And so I lost a bit of myself. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you can ever really fully find yourself in your 20s anyway, but definitely getting a hold of that anxiety might have made things different for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. And I think it can be an interesting thing to reflect on what may have been different or what you may have chosen. And at the same time, as I tell my clients when they're grappling with this, it is probably almost impossible, even if we're aware of what some of those influences are that are feeding into our decision, to like fully step outside of their, I don't want to say constraints because that makes it sound like a negative thing, but like what I'm hearing from you, okay, maybe some of the desires you had around your upbringing and your partner and what that life was and what it represented for you, the anxiety piece, that maybe things would have been different, but of course we can never know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And I don't. really live with regrets because, I could have decided not to have kids and then stepped out and a bus, hit me on the street. So like, it seems silly to try to replay your whole life anyway. And I love my
Absolutely.
kids. They're so, amazing. I can't imagine life without them. But, I think I would have been okay without kids because I had that in me for so long as well.
Yeah.
So I think, like I said, I think, just figuring out what's right for you at that moment and then
Yeah.
leveraging your resources and the technology to, if you need to change your mind later on.
Totally. Yeah. And I think for anyone who's on the fence, like having that openness that you can and will be okay either way. I know this is a really hard idea for people to not just connect with intellectually, but to actually feel. But hearing you say, hey, and it sounds like being a mom has been very fulfilling in many ways, that you love your children, that you have this now great adult relationship with them. Also, that you see it could have been perhaps wonderful not to have had kids. I realize that can be confusing for people because it's like, okay, but then what one should I choose? And what I'm hearing from you is what other guests have said. Well, you choose based on as best you can what you've got available to you in this point in time. But to know that like this decision is not going to make or break your life as far as like everything's going to be terrible or everything's going to be wonderful. I don't know. Would you agree with that or?
Yeah. I think, if you are making the decision that inside feels right to you, you're not going to have regrets. But if you start following what other people are, suggesting and what culture is suggesting and, what your partner really, really wants you to do, and you're feeling doubts about it, like that's when you're going to have problems, I think. So yeah, just like as much as you can go inside and really listen to the still quiet voice in there. I think that's your way to go. And again, then just make the decision and then make the decision right.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kristina. Where can people find you, connect with you? I know with the coaching work, it may not be something that my own listeners, need, if you will, because I understand, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing, but supporting high school or college students, but perhaps there's someone they know. So just tell us a bit about where we can connect.
Yeah, sure. So, as a high school teacher, I've been working with high school students, obviously, and I tutor a lot of students and watching them go to college, watching my kids go to college. And obviously, I went to college and then like they're doing great. And then they go to college and they flounder. And it's because the atmosphere is obviously so much different. So that's why I sort of been working with incoming college students. So I have just, I'm still building this business. So my website is KristinaChilian.com, 1L in Chilian, Kristina with a K. And on Instagram, I'm at Kristina Chilian. And right now I'm just trying to focus on like, how can we help these kids do better in college? And so, yeah, I mean, your listeners probably don't have any college kids if they're trying to decide whether to have children or not. But you never know. I will say that I'm very grateful for our talk today and you having me on. So I'm excited about watching your own audience grow and how they are benefiting from you in this podcast. I think it's really great. I wish this existed when I was younger and trying to decide whether or not to have kids. So I'm really thankful.
Well, thank you so much. I am grateful to you for coming on and for sharing your experience of motherhood thus far with us. And we will make sure to link to those, to the website, to your Instagram in the show notes of today's episode so people can find you. Kristina Chilian with 1L with a K, Kristina. I know what it's like to have a name that people like constantly get wrong. So thank you for coming on and I wish you a beautiful rest of your day.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right, I've been a little bit lax with you lately. Allow me to explain. So I get messages on Instagram to my DMs or emails pretty much every single day from you saying how much you love the podcast, how you've discovered the work I'm doing through the podcast, how much you love the conversations on the podcast. Lots of praise. Yes, it is wonderful for my ego. I always enjoy getting these messages. It makes me feel really grateful and appreciative when you take the time to reach out. But the reason I say I've been a little bit lax lately is because when I first started the podcast, if I got positive feedback from anyone about an episode or the show, I would say, I would love for you to do me a favor and leave a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And the last 2-3 months, I haven't been asking as much because, it's hard sometimes as a business owner and as a podcaster to say, hey, can you do me a little favor? But a big way the podcast gets discovered is through ratings and reviews. And it helps us to reach more people. And they really do make such a difference. I also, of course, love having this sort of social proof, if you will, to be able to show people this is what other people are saying and thinking about the podcast you want to tune into. So my ask of you, whether or not you've been one of those people who sent me a lovely note in the last 2-3 months, if I haven't asked you, I would love for you to leave either a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. We are so close to cracking 200 5-star ratings or reviews on Spotify. We're 9 away right now. Can we get there in the next week? I would love to get to 200 5-star reviews or ratings, I should say, on Spotify. So if you are listening and you have not yet done so, go into the app, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating or review. It will seriously take you 1 minute of your time, and I will be very grateful, and it will go a really long way to helping this podcast get out into more people who are on the fence's ears. That was a mouthful. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.